There was a stretch not long ago when asking who's the best quarterback in football wasn't even a real debate. You'd say the name, people would nod, and the conversation would move on. That name was Patrick Mahomes. 3 Super Bowl rings in 5 seasons. A run so dominant that between 2019 and 2024, the Kansas City Chiefs missed the Super Bowl exactly once. Once. That's not a hot streak, that's an era. And for a long time, it felt like Mahomes owned the throne with no real challengers in sight. But here's the thing about thrones in the NFL. They're never as permanent as they look. Because right now, in the middle of 2026, you'd actually struggle to find people who'll confidently call Mahomes the #1 quarterback in the league. Names like Josh Allen keep coming up. Matthew Stafford's name gets thrown into the mix too. And that alone tells you something has shifted, even if the shift is subtle. So what happened? How does a guy with 3 rings and a Hall of Fame trajectory suddenly find himself in a real conversation instead of running away with it? Part of the answer comes from ESPN, who spent time this month polling actual NFL executives, coaches, and scouts, ranking the league's top quarterbacks from the inside out. Not fan votes, not media takes, people who actually work in these buildings who watch this tape for a living. And when the results came in, Mahomes wasn't sitting at #1. For the first time in 3 years, he'd been bumped down. 2nd place. Not a collapse, not a disaster, but a real signal that something in the perception has changed. One of the voices in that poll was an anonymous defensive coach, someone whose job is literally to find ways to stop quarterbacks like Mahomes. And his critique was blunt. He pointed to Mahomes holding onto the ball too long in the pocket and forcing throws downfield that weren't there, chasing that signature big play instead of just taking what the defense gives him and keeping the offense moving on schedule. In his words, the issues showed up even before last year's injury, and they haven't fully gone away. Think about how strange that sentence would have sounded 5 years ago. Back then, holding the ball late in a play was practically Mahomes' trademark, and it wasn't a weakness, it was the whole show. Defenders would have him dead to rights, sacked, done, and somehow he'd slip a tackle by an extra 2 or 3 seconds and find a receiver breaking open 40 yards downfield. Announcers built entire highlight packages around exactly the behavior this coach is now flagging as a problem. That's how much the calculus has changed. What used to be magic is now getting labeled as a bad habit, and that alone tells you how much scrutiny Mahomes is under compared to almost anyone else playing the position. It's also worth remembering that quarterbacks around the league have been coached for years to specifically account for this. Defensive coordinators spend entire off-seasons building game plans just for Kansas City, drilling their pass rushers on containment lanes, teaching their secondaries to stay in coverage a beat or two longer than they normally would against anyone else, because they know Mahomes will extend the play if given even a sliver of daylight. So in a strange way, some of what looks like Mahomes forcing things might actually be defenses finally solving a puzzle they've been chasing since 2018. The league doesn't stand still. It adapts. And right now, it looks like a lot of that adaptation has been specifically built around slowing down exactly what made Mahomes so dangerous in the first place. Now, that's a real criticism. That's not just noise. Great quarterbacks develop habits over years of success, and sometimes those habits, the ones that used to bail them out, start working. Player. He basically said that without Mahomes last season, this Chiefs team wins maybe 3 games. 3. That's not a throwaway line. That's a coach whose entire job is finding against them instead. Mahomes built his legend on backyard football improvisation, on turning busted plays into touchdowns through pure instinct and arm talent. But when that instinct overrides discipline too often, it shows up on tape, and it shows up in wins and losses. Here's what makes this criticism land differently though. The same coach who called out those flaws also turned around and gave Mahomes one of the highest compliments you can give a weaknesses, admitting that the supporting cast around Mahomes wasn't doing him many favors, and that he was still dragging that roster to relevance through sheer talent alone. And that's really the tension at the center of this whole story. Mahomes has some real, legitimate flaws creeping into his game right now. But he's also still operating on a level most quarterbacks in league history never touch. Without him, the Chiefs aren't a perennial contender. They're a franchise still waiting on a signature moment, still leaning on history from 1969, back when Hank Stram was coaching and Len Dawson was under center for their only other championship. Mahomes single-handedly changed the ceiling of this franchise, and that doesn't get erased by one imperfect season or one poll slipping to second place. It also helps to understand why names like Josh Allen and Matthew Stafford are the ones getting mentioned in the same breath right now. Allen has spent the last couple of seasons looking like the most physically dominant quarterback in football, someone who can beat you with his arm, then flip a switch and beat you with his legs on the very next snap, all while cutting down on the turnovers that used to follow him around early in his career. Coaches and scouts respect discipline paired with that kind of physical upside, and right now Allen is checking both boxes in a way that's hard to argue with. Stafford, on the other hand, represents almost the opposite kind of story. He's not the freak athlete anymore, he's not extending plays with his legs, but he's playing with a kind of veteran precision and command of an offense that comes from 2 decades of reps. He knows exactly where the ball needs to go before the play even starts, and that kind of processing speed is its own form of dominance, just a quieter one. Put those two next to Mahomes, and you start to see the actual argument executives are making. It's not that Mahomes lost his talent. It's that discipline and structure are suddenly carrying as much weight in these conversations as pure ceiling and highlight reel plays, and that's a real shift in how the position gets evaluated at the very top. So where does Kansas City go from here? Because if the diagnosis is accurate, if part of the problem really has been Mahomes trying to do too much because the pieces around him weren't holding up their end, then the fix isn't really about Mahomes changing who he is. It's about the Chiefs finally building him a supporting cast that lets him play within structure again instead of forcing him to manufacture magic on every other snap. And there are real signs that's exactly the direction they're heading. Adding Kenneth Walker III into that backfield gives Kansas City a legitimate downhill threat, someone who can take pressure off the passing game and give this offense a rhythm it's been missing. Then there's the health factor. If Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy can actually stay on the field for a full season, healthy from start to finish, that's a completely different receiving room than what Mahomes has had to work with recently. Suddenly he's not forcing throws into tight windows because he has trust in more places to go with the football. That's the real story behind this ranking. It's not that Mahomes suddenly stopped being great. It's that greatness at this level gets measured under a microscope, and even small cracks, holding the ball a beat too long, chasing a play that isn't there, get magnified when you're compared against your own impossible standard. The league caught up a little. The habits caught up a little. But talent like this doesn't just disappear because of one off-season poll. If Kansas City gets this right, if the run game finally takes pressure off Mahomes and the receiving core stays healthy and productive, don't be surprised if this time next year, we're not even having this conversation. Don't be surprised if Mahomes is right back at number 1, and this whole, he's slipping narrative, becomes just another chapter in the story of a quarterback who keeps proving people wrong every time they count him out. Because at the end of the day, being ranked second in a poll conducted by the smartest football minds in the building isn't a fall from grace. It's still elite. It's still historic. The real question isn't whether Mahomes can still be the best quarterback in football. It's whether Kansas City can build the team around him that lets him get back there without carrying the whole thing on his back. And if history has taught us anything about Patrick Mahomes, it's that betting against him has never been a smart long-term play.